So, as Theron mentioned in his prayer, we live in a time where you have to begin before the beginning. You have to talk to people many times about why they should follow the Bible in the first place. One of the beautiful things about having the truth, though, is that you don't have to be concerned about that sort of investigation, right? If you're telling the truth, if you hold the truth, you're free. And Jesus said that. So there's no problem with reasoning and investigation and questions and things of that nature. So as we've been going through, the goal has been to equip ourselves to have those conversations and to hopefully not be quite as thrown off our game when somebody comes with a question about why we believe what we do, so that we can run through some of those scenarios a little bit ahead of time, so that the first time that you're running into some of these questions is not in the wild, so to speak, but you run across some of that information ahead of time. But ultimately what we're doing is the same thing that was done by the apostles when they went out. They would reason with people in the synagogues and the marketplaces. They would talk to them, and that beauty of the truth is that that's what you can do. You don't have to coerce anybody. Paul himself said that we're not peddling anything. It's not really about salesmanship or anything along those lines, but just simply, here's the truth, you lay it out, and you try and give people answers for their questions, because the Bible has all those answers, and then leave it to fall on whatever quality of soil it is, and then move on with your life. And that's the beauty of being a Christian. You don't have to hard sell anybody. We don't have to win an emotional game with them. We just simply can lay out the truth and just take it from there. So tonight, as we go through things, what we're going to be looking at is, what this chapter really was titled was the top 10 reasons to believe the New Testament writers. Now, one of the beautiful things that we find is that the Bible is a book that was written in open court, so to speak. It's written under the public scrutiny. It's not some guy went off and said, I had a vision, or I had an angel talk to me, and he wrote some stuff on golden tablets, and where are those golden tablets? Have no idea. None of that, just hypothetically speaking. This is all done in the public arena. And so when we talk about the New Testament writers, we're talking about them writing about things that happened in historical context. People other than Christians saw these things. People other than Christians were involved in the events, certainly in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Acts, because these are historical books with historical things going on. So why should somebody believe the New Testament writers as telling the truth? That's really what we're dealing with now, is why should I believe that these guys are telling the truth? And so there's really 10 top reasons that they lay out, and really tonight I'm just going to focus on going through those and talking about them, because they're really pretty good in and of themselves. This chapter does stand on its own 2 feet pretty well. I apologize, you're going to see me with these Ricolas. I've just got a scratchy throat that I'm working through. But reason number 1, the New Testament writers included embarrassing details about themselves. Think about if you were going to make up a story, and you're going to make up a story that you're involved in. Would you put embarrassing details of yourself in that? Pam would. Okay. That's right. Most people would not. Pam, she is an exceptional person. One of a kind. Most people, if telling a story that would involve themselves, they would at the very least gloss over the embarrassing things that they did. But when we read in the New Testament, and we read these books that are written by apostles, by eyewitnesses to the events, what sort of details do they include about themselves? that are embarrassing. Yep. We've got a coward, right? Right. So Paul makes it very clear that his beginning of his journey was he was on the wrong side of the story all along and involved in killing Christians. Anything else? Is it? Yep. Right? Right. But it is true. There's lots of that in the Old Testament, some in the New Testament as well, but the Old Testament especially has that very epic storylines of things and people that we consider Old Testament heroes. When you really get down to it, how many of you would like David if you knew him and you knew all the things he'd done? I don't think you'd hang out. I think there's, and then you look at even men like Abraham. Abraham had some very big mistakes. Here, just pretend you're my sister. And then some other guy takes her. And I mean, he lets it go on for a while before it finally comes out. And these are the heroes, right? New Testament, same idea. Peter ever say anything stupid? Thomas? Matthew. What's Matthew's history? Where did he come from? Tax collector. And the first time he has Jesus over to his house, that's when the whole event comes down that Jesus is eating with tax collectors and sinners, which are presumably Matthew's friends. Right? These are people that he knows. These are embarrassing details that come up about the New Testament writers. They were not perfect guys. And even once they began to follow Christ, it's not like there's this perfect turnaround because you see them continue to make some of those same mistakes even after the beginning of it. Or them misunderstanding Jesus. Jesus will tell them to do something and they either don't follow through or they disagree with him. I mean, the whole "get behind me, Satan," that's a kind of embarrassing detail about if you had the Son of God call you Satan, do you think you'd want other people to know that? But Peter includes that. I mean, these are details that are added. So when people are lying, they don't do that. So we're just looking at signs of authenticity. And so that's one of the simplest ones. One is, it includes embarrassing details and difficult sayings of Jesus. Now, we need to clarify very quickly, embarrassing doesn't mean Jesus did anything wrong, right? Jesus is not sinful by any means, shape, or form. So the type of things that he did that are embarrassing are not embarrassing from the standpoint that they were sinful, but they did very much buck tradition. Right? Jesus would do things that would be shocking, like when he's walking along on the Sabbath and they're eating the heads of grain and he's confronted about it, what does he do? Yeah, he goes back and he confronts him on it and he says, well, wait a second, you let David get away with this, why are you? And he argues the point that he has a right to do that, which is very different than what the average person would have done. We don't have this picture of Jesus being the pristine follower of the Pharisees' traditions. We see him bucking those traditions all the time. Or doing things like, I don't know, what happened to him when he was 12? He went to the temple. Mom and dad lost him. right? That whole event is included. And it could easily be misconstrued as him being a upstarty child, right? Now, understand, that's not what I'm saying he was. But I'm saying that's an odd detail that's included about Jesus that if it weren't true, why would you put it in there? It doesn't bolster your case. That's the point. Or the difficult things that Jesus would say. Several of them that they listed in the book that were difficult sayings of Jesus. If you go to like Matthew 24, verse 36, he makes the point that not even the angels in heaven nor the Son know the time. That's a difficult saying. He's the Son of God. And yet he made this point in Matthew 24, verse 36, that, well, what time is this event going to happen? And he says, the angels in heaven don't know, neither do I know. Does that make it more complicated for us? In our mind, wouldn't it be easier to just think, okay, well, he's the Son of God, so he knows everything at all times, right? But Jesus there in that passage said, the angels don't know, and I don't know. Now, what's the answer to that verse, by the way? What's the conclusion to it? That's the smart answer right there. It's a difficult saying. I have some opinions on it, but there's other people who have some opinions on that too that are equally valid. It's a difficult saying. I might mention, if God's Son were to come down to earth, do you think he'd ever say anything that sounded like calculus to us and was a little difficult? I mean, he's going to say some smart things, and we're going to have to chew on it a bit. But that doesn't paint the picture. Jesus came down and was who he was meant to be, not who we wanted him to be or the type of Savior that would be easiest for people to process. Right? Does that make sense? He's not the kind of Savior that just matched everybody's expectations. In fact, what were the expectations of the Jews when they were looking for a Savior? What did they want? Yeah, they wanted a king. He's going to take care of Rome, wipe them out, and you have a physical kingdom set up. Did Jesus do any of that? No. In fact, he rejected being king. That's another kind of difficult thing that they put in there, is that Jesus, they wanted at one point to make him king, and he rejected that option. And so there's a lot of various things that are included in Jesus's life that are difficult to struggle through, right? The New Testament is not all milk, is it? Some of it's meat. But if you were going to write a story, you'd leave that stuff out because it would make it harder for people to believe. In fact, when Jesus preached, how many times did he preach things that had the opposite effect? They didn't make it easier, but they actually made it harder. Like in John, when he told them, drink my blood and eat my flesh. What was the reaction of the people when he spoke that way? Yeah, they didn't want to have anything to do with him, right? That's a difficult saying. Why say it that way? Well, the answer is, he's God and he knows what he's doing, and that's what he actually said, so that's why we record it that way. So, one of the reasons you should believe the New Testament writers are saying the truth is simply because they didn't say the easy thing. The third is that the New Testament writers left demanding sayings of Jesus. Once again, if you were going to make a religion and you wanted it to grow, you would try and build into that religion the things that people would want to hear. That's how megachurches grow, right? Cut out all the hard stuff. I mean, one of the things that you will find with megachurches is a general rule. I'm talking in generalities right now, but as a general rule, most of the sermons that you hear, you're not going to have anything you disagree with. It's not what they're saying, it's what they're not saying, right? So you leave out all of the hard bits. Anything that's too demanding, you leave that stuff out, and then everybody's got the cotton candy. Well, did Jesus do that? It's not the New Testament at all. New Testament is not an easy book to follow. It's full of all of these very difficult, demanding things that Jesus says that you have to wrestle with and work on. And by the way, once you've worked on it for a while, you're going to have to work on it more, because the more you work at it, the more you realize you got work to do. Think about what are some demanding things that Jesus says of us and expects of us? Repent and be baptized. Repent, by very definition, change your mind. That's hard. You just turn your mind around. What's another one? Love your enemies. Yeah, and do good to those who harm you. Yeah, I don't like doing that at all. Follow me. Yeah, follow me, especially when you know where he went. Yeah. Obey the laws of the land. Yeah. What if I don't like those laws? What if I don't like what if I have a master that's unreasonable or a governor that's unreasonable? All those things. Yeah, Pam? Okay, yeah, you got to love me more than father and mother. Is that the one you're thinking of? Yeah. I mean, these are hard sayings. Take up your cross and follow after me. All of these are difficult things. And if you were to add up the things that Jesus said, I think you would find that that's a pretty big pile of difficult things that he said and demanding things. That's one of the reasons that it's hard for us as Christians to study our Bibles sometimes, is because as soon as you start reading it, you find some demand of you again, don't you? There's like another thing I got to do. It's also why Paul warned Timothy, what will people eventually try to acquire for themselves? They're going to heap up for themselves what? Did you have it, or did you have something else? Treasured on earth, and teachers with itching ears, to take care of their itching ears, and yeah, all those things. Yeah, you had something else, though. Sorry, I derailed you. It was such a great thought, too. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. In fact, most of the time when you set boundaries, all we want is what's ever on the other side of that boundary, right? I mean, yeah, we don't like boundaries, but Jesus set lots of them. So, yeah. Yeah, preachers don't like preaching on that stuff either. I'll add. Yeah, it's uncomfortable, especially in a culture that doesn't talk that way at all, where there's differences between male and female roles. Absolutely, yeah. Anything else? Issue of divorce, yeah. Yeah, that you can't just do it for whatever reason you want. That definitely flies in the face of the world that we live in today. Absolutely. So all of these are, clear things that are said by our Savior, and he addresses them head on, so that, once again, if you were going to build a religion and they were going to just take the things they wanted and put them in and leave the other stuff out, wouldn't that be the stuff they'd leave out? If you're trying to build a religious movement. Okay, anybody have anything else to add to that one before we move to the fourth one? Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. One way to even just simply think about it is that the Bible isn't a book about us, is it? It's a book about God, and he's given it to us. And you're right. He says, this is what I expect of you. And this is, his authority trumps ours, all of that sort of stuff. So, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the fourth reason, and we use these once again as we're talking with people. It's like, well, why do you believe they lied? Because if they were lying, they were really bad at it. That's the whole point, right? The New Testament writers carefully distinguish Jesus' words from their own. So raise your hand if you use a red letter edition Bible. Okay. A lot of people do. A lot of people do. It makes life a lot simpler, right? One of the things that you will find is that red letter edition Bibles, regardless of the translation, they don't have any problem figuring out which ones are the red letters and which ones aren't. Because they put that in there, right? That's just the copy of the Bible that you have. That's a feature that the publisher put in to make your life easier, is to color those words red. But they don't struggle with what ones are the red ones and what ones are not. And the reason for that is because in the New Testament, they're very, very, very careful, the apostles were, to make it clear when Jesus was speaking and when he wasn't. And in fact, I'll quote here directly from the book, because I think this was one of those that I felt like they said just so very well. Why do we cite this as evidence of their trustworthiness? Because it would have been very easy for the New Testament writers to solve first century theological disputes by putting words into Jesus' mouth. After all, if you're making up the Christianity story and trying to pass it off as the truth, wouldn't you simply make up more quotes from Jesus to convince stubborn people to see things your way? Right early on, you have the Gospels, and it's like, this is what Jesus said. And we don't have a whole bunch of junk added on later on that wasn't there in the beginning. They delineated that stuff right up front. And so, once again, if you're making up a religion, it's kind of like when somebody dies. And have you ever run into a case where somebody died, maybe a grandparent or something like that, and the family, there's certain people in the family who move into that mode of, well, if Grandpa were here, he'd say, what he'd want. And really, the answer is we can't know what Grandpa would want, right? We can guess at it, but they almost bring Grandpa in as an authority figure, and they put words in his mouth to get what they want. It would have been real easy for the apostles to do that with Jesus. It's like, well, I was talking to him one time, and you know what he said to me? We don't see that. We see a very clear statement in the New Testament. This is what Jesus said, and there's not this later additions or retractions or anything like that happens as time goes on. And that's the mark of authenticity, because they were writing down what he actually said, not making up a story that would fit their religious views as it progressed. Does that make sense? That one's I will say, one of the tougher ones, but I would put it this way. We have all those manuscripts that we've looked at. Remember how we talked about how there's all those manuscripts out there? If you look at the later manuscripts and you look at the early manuscripts, guess what? Jesus says the same stuff in both. And that's impressive, because it would have been very easy if they were making it up. Later manuscripts would have more red letters. Okay. Fifth one, the New Testament writers include events related to the resurrection that they would not have invented. So you think about the resurrection, there are particular details about it that are odd. One of them is the burial was by Joseph of Arimathea, and he was helped by Nicodemus. And both Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus were members of what group? Sanhedrin. They were members of the Sanhedrin. Who put Jesus to death? Sanhedrin. That's a weird detail, isn't it? Like that, if you're going to make up the story, you don't have the bad guy's council be the ones who give him his burial. And yet, that's what's recorded. The first witnesses of the gospel, in the gospel of Jesus being resurrected, who were they? Yeah, Mary, and they were a group of women. Well, Melu, what you mention that the Bible deals with? Women in subjection, that there's difference in male and female roles. Right now, we struggle with this idea of women being in subjection. Did they struggle with the idea of women being in subjection in the first century? The women were low on the totem pole. It was the opposite issue. The idea of women having value was the thing that was revolutionary at the time. And when Peter says things like being equal heirs in the inheritance, and equal heirs of salvation, that's shocking in the first century. The very first people to witness the resurrection of Jesus, not men, women. And in a lot of Jewish courts, a woman wouldn't even be considered a valid witness. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's the world it was. That was the way it was. And so, for the very first witnesses of Jesus' resurrection to be women is not the most compelling eyewitness accounts from the first century standpoint. In a world that was run by men, and when men would have been considered more valuable witnesses, the men don't show up till later. And in fact, when the women go and tell the men, what's their initial reaction? Yeah, they don't believe it to start with. So these are embarrassing and odd details that you wouldn't invent. Along with that, they include things like the explanation that the Jews gave for why the tomb was empty. What was the explanation, by the way? What's the explanation that the Jews gave for why there was an empty tomb? Somebody came, the apostles came, and they stole the body. The only reason you know that is why? It's recorded in the Bible. See, you and I weren't there. We didn't know that. The only reason you know that is because that counter-argument was brought up. If you're telling the truth, you include those details. You go, oh yeah, this is what they thought, and this is what they were telling people. But if you're trying to build a story that makes you look good and your case look strong, do you bring up the other guy's arguments? You try and hide those. And so, once again, you have another detail that was, if they are making up a religion, they wouldn't have included it. Sixth reason, the New Testament writers include more than 30 historically confirmed people in their writings. This is a really big one. In fact, he has us at 6. I'd put this at like 2 or 3. The Bible happens in the real world. So, when they say things like Pilate said this, or Augustus called for this census, or Festus said this, or Felix, all of these governors and officials and things like that, these were all people who actually lived in the world at that time. And so they write this account of what happened at Jesus's during his life and his trial. And so they say, well, Pilate said this at the trial. If it's not true, what happens? What was that? Historically, we would know it, right? Because we've already covered the Gospels came out within the lifetime of the people who saw those events. Well, Pilate, his whole life is a recorded event because as a politician and a governor, they would record these historical events. They would have records from court trials and things like that. So if what they said about Pilate or Festus or Felix or whoever was a lie, all it takes is for people to go, I was there and it absolutely didn't happen that way. Or let me pull up the court records. You know, Paul was on trial in the book of Acts. Paul's on trial and there's records of that trial and there's an attorney named Tertullus who shows up. They're going to have records of all that stuff. If you're lying about how that thing went down and you're just telling a pretend story, we can go to the court records and check it. So the fact is, this didn't happen in a bubble. It happened in the real world. And so when you look at the Bible, it's one of the things that makes it just fundamentally different than any other major religious document. Because that's not some vision some guy had. These are historical events that could be validated or torn apart if they weren't valid by those around. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. So these things are confirmed by sources that were not pro-Christianity by any means. And Josephus is a great example of that. Any other comments or anything on that? Okay, the seventh one, the New Testament writers include divergent details. This is one of the things that we struggle with sometimes. When you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those are 4 accounts of the Gospels. And have you ever noticed that sometimes it feels like they don't quite line up? In fact, if you get into really close detail in it, and you start to build, and I did this one time, where you can buy, they call them a harmony of the Gospels, where they put them all together and put them in chronological order, and I thought, oh, that'd be really cool to just do it myself. And that seemed like a great idea at the time. It was not a fun task. But I did that myself, as I just said, okay, let's go and get these to all line up. And one of the things that you figure out pretty quickly is that they will record the same event, but different details about it. How many angels were at the tomb? 2. Do they all say 2, though? No. Now, here's the thing. For us, we can look at that, and there's 2 approaches. You can go, oh, no, this is a problem. But let me tell you, I've talked to police officers. And there's one friend of mine. He's a police officer, retired now, went into preaching. And so he used to interrogate people. That was part of his job. So you go to a car wreck or scene of a crime or any number of things, and you would investigate and talk to all the various witnesses, and you pull them off to the side. And one of the number 1 signs that they're lying is everybody's story is exactly the same. That's how you know they're lying. If their story is exactly the same, they're lying. Because nobody sees the same event exactly the same. That's how that works. Think about it. Even as little kids, like, no, this is what you're going to tell mom. I didn't hit you. This is what happened, right? And you get your stories straight. But in a real car wreck, everything happens super fast, doesn't it? And one person sees these details, another person sees these details, and all works out. But if people have colluded to fabricate a story, then they end up saying the same phrases with the same details, and it all lines up too perfectly. So police officers will tell you over and over and over again that if you have 2, 3, 4 people and their story is exactly alike, they're not being honest with you. They have fabricated a story. Because real people see things from different vantage points. You see it in your marriage, don't you? You ever talking about the exact same event with your spouse and they had a different view on it than you? It just happens. Perspective, right? 4 gospel accounts, and each of them had a different vantage point to those events. And then on top of it, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're all writing for different reasons. John himself makes it clear that he's writing to include a bunch of details that the other ones didn't. Matthew was writing primarily to Jews. Luke is writing primarily to Gentiles. So the focus becomes different. And so, there's these divergent details. And that is the sign of authenticity. That's the way things actually work out when you ask multiple people about the same event. Now, are they contradictory? Not contradictory details. So I don't want to confuse divergent with contradictory. So contradictory details would be, one guy says there was 2 people and one of them says that there were 2 angels and only 2, and the other said there was 1 angel and only 1. That would not be divergent, those would be contradictory, right? But if I came out and I said, hey, I was talking with Theron, and then Theron, you were talking to him, and Theron said, oh, I was talking to Scott and Perry. Is the fact that I didn't include Perry in the conversation, when I just said I was talking to Theron, does that mean I'm lying? No, I'm just talking about that particular detail. And when Theron's telling a story, he thought it was important to include Perry in because he's a nicer guy than me. Right? It's just so It's just a vantage point difference. And people, when they talk and recount stories, that's how they do it. That's the way people normally do that when they're just telling the truth. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. And that's not necessarily true at all. Yeah, 3 gifts doesn't mean. Now, what we know is there were wise men, so it had to be at least 2, right? But could it have been 15? Or is all we know, right? But we know there were only 3 gifts. So it's one of those things where we have to be careful to, what did they actually say, not putting thoughts into their head. Yeah. Anybody have anything else there? Okay, reason 8, the New Testament writers challenge their readers to check out verifiable facts, even facts about miracles. In the New Testament, they are constantly turning people to the fact that you can investigate this stuff for yourself. Paul would talk about in 1 Corinthians 15 how when Jesus was resurrected, there were over 500 witnesses that saw him. And then he would say, of whom a great many are still around. Why would he say that detail? Yeah, you go check it out. Right? It's not so useful to us, right? Because they're certainly long gone from our standpoint. But to the people who was originally writing Corinthians to, he's saying, these people are still around. You go check with them whether this really happened. So they would consistently bring up that idea that there are things that you could investigate for yourself. In 2 Peter, which we're right in the middle of on Sunday mornings, Peter will say, we don't follow cleverly devised tales, but we are eyewitnesses. So there is this reference to this fact that people had seen this stuff, and you could check for yourself. And along those lines, Jesus' empty tomb. Do you know where his empty tomb is? It's a trick question. What's the name of where his empty tomb is? What's the name of the location? The rock. He was buried at Calvary. Because it says right there was a garden there. They described there was a garden with a tomb, empty tomb right there, right in that same spot. They tell you and describe for you the general vicinity of where Jesus was buried and where Joseph of Arimathea buried him, which also tells you, because it was his tomb, so you could investigate that. So they don't just say, oh, he was buried in a tomb somewhere. They verify the location of those things. They verify the location of the crucifixion. Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Yeah. They would include details about miracles that were very specific, like the number of fish that were pulled up in the net. Things that are very, very specific details that if you got wrong, once again, if you're lying, don't lie in detail. That's the key to lying. Keep it as generic as you can, right? If you start getting specific, that's when you get caught up. Specific lies are confusing. Keep it general. But the Bible is written in very specific detail about these different things. The 9th reason that he brings up, and this is an interesting one because we don't think about it too much, but really, think about the feeding of the 5,000. What did Jesus do to feed the 5,000? What does the account give us of the things that he did? Yeah, he had the fish, had the bread, he gave thanks, and then he started to break the bread and fed everybody, and then they picked up the bread at the end and the fish, and they had a bunch left over. Wouldn't you like to know some more details about how that actually went down? Like, that's always messed with my mind. Like, as he breaks off a piece of the bread, does it regrow bread? I mean, these are weird questions, right? But how does that work? This is a very good question. Yeah. And so As you're dividing out the fish, are you cutting the fish and it's cooked and you give a slice and here's a fillet and then there's a new fillet that grows? What are we doing? How is this working? If I saw a miracle, you would know every single detail about it, and the miracle would be the fish story miracle, wouldn't it? It get bigger and bigger and fancier as time goes on. But they describe the miracles of Jesus the same way they describe everything else, unembellished. This is what happened. He took the bread, took the fish, gave thanks, broke it, fed 5,000. It has that authentic mark of this is just the way it happened. We're giving you the facts. We're not grandstanding. Because when people grandstand, they tend to embellish. That's the fish story idea, right? When I've got this exciting fishing story to tell you, that fish gets a little bit bigger and a little fancier and he pulls a little harder on the line every time I tell the story. Not with this. It's just simple, plain things. Jesus walking on water, how does it describe it? Middle of the night, and he came walking on the water. That's how it describes it. You know I would spin a much bigger yarn over that if I had been there. But they don't, because they're just laying out the facts the way that they happen, and that's the mark of truth. Anybody have anything they'd add to that or any thoughts? Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a great point. There's another public event, right? And there was no giant barbecue. They just saw Jesus with some fish and bread and 5,000 witnesses to the fact that, yeah, we all went home full. I mean, that's another verifiable fact. So I don't know. That's a very good question. These are those sorts of details that don't make any sense to me. I know. See, if I were to do it, there'd be none left. It would be exactly right. But he doesn't. He makes it so they pick up leftovers, and it messes with your head, doesn't it? You're saying the reason there were leftovers was so they could go home? That he did, absolutely. And, I mean, what we know is he did it right. I mean, there's no debate over that, but there are things that he did that he doesn't tell us why he did it that way. And maybe it was for carryout. I had not thought of that, Pam. There are so many things that you think of that I have never thought of. So there's a game that preachers play, and I know I'm out of time and we're only at reason 9, but there's a game that we play, which is if I'm going to teach a class, I go through and I ask myself the question on every verse, what's a question somebody could ask here that would be a weird question? And I just need to make sure I'm ready for it. And you break that game for me, just so you know. And I know it makes you happy. That's what I'm telling you. You break that game for me. I've been doing that game for like 20 years. And I'm pretty good at it. But not Bratton level. Okay, and then the last reason, the New Testament writers abandoned long-held sacred beliefs and practices, adopted new ones, and did not deny their testimony under persecution or threat of death. So, here's the other piece of it. They wrote what they did, and it didn't make their lives better. It made it much worse. They had to give up everything to follow these things that they taught and told everybody else to follow. They were Jewish people of a very pious and devout religious movement. And yet they left all that stuff behind. And then all they got out of it was persecution and death, and their life threatened. And I mean, you just have to think about Paul and all that he gave up and all of the suffering that he went through. And so when people use the argument, they say, well, they lied just so that they could get something out of it. Because, people lie all the time to get some advantage. That's my question is, what's their advantage? What was the advantage these men gained? There's nothing. They lost everything. They gained only one thing, and that's Christ. That's what Paul said. That's the only gain. Everything else they had to give up. And so, as you look at it, the Bible does not match the way that somebody would write if they were lying. It does match the way that people would write if they were telling the truth. Any comments or questions, anything like that? Okay.